the unchanging chamber. The celestial assembly hall floated in the void between galaxies, a monument to order that had existed for 10 millennia. Its crystalline walls hummed with the frequency of a billion civilizations living in perfect harmony, each following the protocols that had brought peace to the stars. Ambassador Thexyler of the Vraxian Dominion stood at his designated podium, position 47 of 10,000, as he had for the past 3 centuries. His chitinous form remained motionless, antennae barely twitching as the daily proceedings unfolded with their usual predictability. To his left, the gaseous form of Counselor Wispella shimmered within her containment sphere. To his right, the crystalline Arbiter Gendar refracted light in patterns that hadn't changed in 800 years. Motion 4,782,991, droned High Chancellor Morvex from the central dais, his 6 eyes glazed with ceremonial boredom. Regarding the standardization of atmospheric compression ratios in Sector 7439. All in favor? 10,000 voices responded in unison. Affirmed. Opposed. Silence. Abstentions. Silence. Thexyler suppressed what his species called a soul sigh. This was the 4,782,991st motion passed without debate, without discussion, without a single dissenting voice. The protocols were absolute. The protocols were eternal. The protocols were... Excuse me? The voice cut through the chamber like a supernova through the darkness. Every being in the assembly hall froze. Morvex's vocal membranes seized mid-sentence. Wispella's containment sphere actually flickered. Even the automated recording system seemed to stutter. Someone had interrupted the proceedings. In 10,000 years, no one had interrupted the proceedings. I'm sorry, the voice continued, and Thexyler's antennae swiveled toward the source, a newly installed podium at position 10,001. But I have a question about motion 4,782,991. The being standing there was bipedal, ridiculously bipedal, balanced on just 2 legs like some kind of evolutionary dare. Its skin was a peculiar brownish tone, and tufts of dark fibers sprouted from its head. The species designation flashed across Thexyler's neural interface: human. Planet of origin, Earth. Status: newly contacted, provisional membership pending. Morvex's jaw hung open, revealing 3 rows of ceremonial teeth that hadn't been used for actual communication in centuries. Question? Yes, the human said, consulting a primitive data tablet. Ambassador Kira Vance, representing Earth. According to the motion text, you're standardizing atmospheric compression ratios to 1.4 to 1 across all habitable worlds in Sector 7439. But 3 of those worlds, Kelter 4, Nimbos and Sereth, have indigenous populations adapted to ratios of 1.7 to 1. Won't this protocol require them to undergo genetic modification or relocate? The silence that followed was so complete that Thexyler could hear his own circulatory fluid pulsing through his exoskeleton. The protocols. Morvex began, his voice boxes struggling to form words they'd never needed before. The protocols are absolute. I understand that, Kira said, her tone infuriatingly pleasant. But my question is about the practical application. Do the indigenous populations get a choice in this matter? Counselor Wispella's form brightened to an alarmed crimson. Choice? The protocols determine optimal outcomes for all species. Individual preference is irrelevant. Irrelevant to whom? Kira asked. Thexyler felt something stirring in his thorax, a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades. Curiosity? No, something more dangerous. Interest. Ambassador Vance, Arbiter Gendar chimed, his crystalline voice resonating with barely contained distress. You must understand, the Galactic Council has maintained perfect order for 10,000 years precisely because we do not question the protocols. Every motion passed has been carefully calculated to maximize universal harmony. That's impressive, Kira said, and Thexyler detected what his species would call suspicious sincerity in her tone. Who does the calculating? The calculation committee, Morvex stammered. And who's on that committee? The committee members are selected according to Protocol 7, subsection 42, paragraph. But who are they? Kira interrupted again, and Thexyler heard several gasps echo through the chamber. 2 interruptions in one session. This was unprecedented. This was chaos. This was refreshing? Morvex's eyes darted across his interface. The current committee consists of... Oh. Kira leaned forward. The committee members are deceased. All of them. Have been for approximately 6,000 years. The chamber erupted in a sound that hadn't been heard in millennia: confused chatter. So, Kira said, her voice somehow cutting through the noise, you've been automatically approving motions calculated by a dead committee for 6,000 years? Thexyler's antennae were vibrating uncontrollably now. He looked around the chamber and saw something he'd never seen before. His fellow counselors actually looking at each other, actually communicating outside the protocols. Kira checked her tablet. I have more questions. Morvex made a sound like a deflating fusion core. Of course you do. The questioning. The emergency recess was called for the first time in 4,000 years. Thexyler found himself in the delegation lounge, a space designed for casual interaction between council sessions but rarely used since casual interaction wasn't covered under the protocols. He watched through the transparency wall as Ambassador Kira Vance stood surrounded by a cluster of other delegates, her tablet emitting a soft glow. She's going to destabilize everything, Counselor Wispella hissed, her gaseous form pulsing in agitated orange. 10,000 years of perfect harmony, threatened by one primitive species that can't even achieve faster-than-light travel without stealing our gateway codes. Technically we gave them the codes, Arbiter Jindar noted. Protocol 88 requires we extend provisional membership to any species demonstrating sentience and basic space travel capability. A protocol that perhaps should be questioned, muttered Ambassador Felmoth of the Crepuscular Collective, his multiple eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of deep thought among his kind. Wispella brightened to an alarmed white. Are you suggesting we question the protocols? I'm suggesting, Felmoth said carefully, that the human already is. And she raises valid points. Thexyler watched as more delegates drifted toward the human. She was explaining something, gesturing animatedly, another peculiar human trait, using physical movement to enhance communication. Inefficient, the protocols would say, yet somehow effective. Ambassador Thexyler. He turned to find Kira approaching, her face arranged in what his xenology database identified as a friendly smile. Behind her trailed a dozen curious delegates. Ambassador Vance, he acknowledged, his translator rendering his clicking speech into Galactic Common. Your performance in the chamber was notable. I hope I didn't cause too much trouble, she said, though her expression suggested she wasn't particularly concerned if she had. I just have a lot of questions. So we observed. Might I inquire how you prepared for today's session? It typically takes new members several decades to fully comprehend the protocol framework. Kira's smile widened. Oh, I read the protocols. All 47 million pages. Took me about 6 weeks. Impossible, Wispella declared, drifting closer. The protocols are encoded in quantum linguistic matrices that require specialized neural interfaces to properly interpret. I had my ship's AI translate them into English, Kira shrugged. Admittedly, some of the poetry was lost in translation. Poetry? Thexyler's antennae perked up. There is no poetry in the protocols. Really? Because Protocol 4392, subsection 7 reads like a haiku when translated properly. Order eternal/silence brings harmony/questions bring chaos. I mean it's not good poetry but still. Jindar's crystalline form flashed with what might have been amusement. The protocols were never meant to be analyzed for artistic merit. Maybe that's part of the problem, Kira said, pulling up her tablet. I've been running some models based on the voting patterns for the last 1,000 years. Want to see something interesting? Before anyone could protest, she projected a holographic graph into the space between them. Delegates who had been pretending to ignore the conversation suddenly found reasons to drift closer. This, Kira indicated a flat line running through the projection, is the rate of innovation in council space over the past millennium. Technologies developed, new artistic movements, scientific breakthroughs, all essentially flatlined. We have achieved optimal efficiency, Morvex said, having apparently overcome his shock enough to join the gathering crowd. Innovation beyond the protocols is unnecessary. Is it though? Kira expanded the graph. Because this line here shows the rate of environmental degradation on 4,000 member worlds. It's rising. Slowly but steadily. And this line shows population decline among 60% of member species. Normal cyclical variations, Wispella insisted, though her color had shifted to an uncertain yellow. For 10,000 years? Kira raised an eyebrow. That's a pretty long cycle. And look at this, she pulled up another dataset. Requests for colony relocation have increased 400% in the last 2,000 years. Know why? Silence. Because the protocols don't account for stellar drift. Stars move. Planets' orbits decay. But the protocols for planetary management were calculated 10,000 years ago and never updated. You're managing the galaxy with outdated astronomical data. Thexyler felt his respiratory spiracle seize. She was right. How had no one noticed? The protocols contain mechanisms for updates, Morvex protested weakly. Do they? Kira scrolled through her tablet. Because I found Protocol 3, subsection 891, which states that protocols can only be modified by unanimous vote of the Council. When was the last time that happened? The High Chancellor's eyes went distant as he consulted his neural interface. His face went through several colors Thexyler had never seen before. Never? Morvex whispered. It's never happened. So you've created a perfect system, Kira said softly, that can never adapt, never change, never grow. And you've been running on autopilot for so long that you've forgotten how to fly. Ambassador Drexel of the Titan Forge clans, who hadn't spoken in council for 3 centuries, suddenly laughed, a sound like grinding continental plates. What are you suggesting, human? He rumbled. That we abandon 10 millennia of peace? Kira smiled. I'm suggesting we have a conversation about it. Novel concept, I know. The cascade. The main chamber reconvened in chaos, or what passed for chaos in a body that had forgotten the meaning of the word. Thexyler noticed it first in small things. Delegates actually turning to face each other instead of staring straight ahead, the murmur of conversation continuing even after High Chancellor Morvex called for order, the way Councillor Felmoth had moved his podium 3 centimeters closer to his neighbor. 3 centimeters didn't sound like much, but in a chamber where nothing had moved for millennia, it might as well have been a parsec. Order. Morvex's voice cracked across the hall. We will have order. We've had nothing but order, Ambassador Drexel rumbled from his position. Perhaps what we need is a little disorder. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Wispella flickered so rapidly she resembled a strobe light. Ambassador Drexel, Morvex said, his voice strained, you are dangerously close to violating Protocol 1, respect for established harmony. Actually, Kira's voice rang out, and Thexyler watched Morvex's shoulders slump in defeat. Protocol 1 doesn't say anything about respecting established harmony. I checked. It says, all members shall endeavor to maintain harmony through reasoned discourse. It literally requires us to talk things through. That's a mistranslation, Morvex sputtered. Is it? Arbiter Gendar's crystalline voice held a note of curiosity. I've just cross-referenced the original text. The human is correct. The protocol calls for discourse, not silence. Morvex looked like he'd been hit with a graviton pulse. But, we've always interpreted it to mean. You've always assumed it meant that, Kira corrected gently. No one actually checked. Thexyler found himself doing something he hadn't done in 200 years. He activated his podium speaker function outside of the formal voting process. Ambassador Vance, his voice clicked across the chamber, you mentioned earlier that you had more questions. Every eye, sensor, and perception organ in the hall focused on him. Thexyler felt his exoskeleton prickle with anxiety, but also, surprisingly, exhilaration. I do, Kira said, her human face arranging itself into that pleased expression again. Lots of them. But first I'd like to propose something. May I approach the central dais? There's no protocol for that, Morvex said weakly. Then let's make one, suggested Ambassador Lyrionel of the Resonance Choir, her harmonic voice causing sympathetic vibrations in the chamber walls. She was young for a council member, only 400 years in service, and Thexyler had never heard her speak before. Second, called Ambassador Torvin of the Mechanical Concordat. Third, added Felmoth. Morvex looked around wildly as if searching for someone to tell him this wasn't happening. Very well. Ambassador Vance, you may approach. Kira walked to the central dais with a confidence that suggested her species regularly did unprecedented things. She stood beside Morvex and projected her tablet's display across the entire chamber. I've spent the last 6 weeks preparing for today, she said. Not just reading the protocols but analyzing them. Running simulations. Comparing your governmental structure to the 247 different systems humanity has tried over our relatively short history. Want to know what I found? Do we have a choice? Wispella muttered, but she'd shifted to an interested purple. You're not a council, Kira said bluntly. You're a bureaucracy that's forgotten it serves living beings. Look at this. She highlighted a section of the protocols. You have procedures for filing grievances, but the average processing time is 340 years. Most species don't live that long. The protocols ensure fairness through careful deliberation, Gendar said, but his voice held doubt. They ensure nothing gets done, Kira countered. Motion 4,782,991, the one I questioned? It was originally filed 600 years ago by the Keltorian delegation. Every single Keltorian who filed it is dead. Their grandchildren's grandchildren are dead. And yet you just voted to change their atmospheric composition without anyone from Keltor 4 being alive to consent. The chamber fell silent. I have 10,000 years of voting records here, Kira continued, her voice softer now. Do you know how many motions were rejected in that time? 17. Do you know how many of those were rejected because they actually had problems versus being rejected due to filing errors? 0. All 17 were procedural rejections that were later refiled and approved. You're saying we've never actually debated anything? Lyrionel's voice resonated with shock. I'm saying you've forgotten how. Thexyler watched as the truth settled over the chamber like cosmic dust. Around him, delegates were accessing their own records, verifying Kira's claims, and he could feel the growing realization spreading like a quantum entanglement. So what do you propose, human? Morvex asked, and for the first time in Thexyler's memory, the High Chancellor sounded genuinely curious rather than simply performing a role. Kira smiled. I propose we table all motions for today and instead do something this council hasn't done in millennia. Which is? Let's actually talk to each other. And then, to Thexyler's amazement, she sat down on the floor of the central dais, crossed her legs in that peculiar human fashion, and waited. For a long moment nothing happened. Then Ambassador Drexel laughed again, the sound like mountains grinding together, and lowered himself to sit beside her. One by one the delegates began to move. The conversation. The Celestial Assembly Hall had never seen anything like it. Delegates abandoned their assigned podiums and gathered in clusters across the chamber floor. Some sat in the human fashion, others hovered, a few simply collapsed their structural integrity in positions that approximated relaxation. The formal seating arrangement that had existed for 10 millennia dissolved in less than an hour. Thexyler found himself in a group near the eastern transparency wall, surrounded by species he'd stood next to for centuries but never actually spoken with. Kira moved between the groups, not directing but facilitating, asking questions that seemed simple but somehow cracked open conversations that had been frozen for eons. Ambassador Thexyler, she said, settling near his position, you've been on the council for 300 years. What made you join? The question caught him off guard. No one had ever asked him that. The Vraxian Dominion nominated me, he began automatically, then stopped. That was the protocol answer. Kira waited, her face expectant. But I volunteered for the nomination. I thought I could make a difference. And have you? The words hung in the air. Thexyler's antennae drooped. I have voted on 1,247,392 motions, he said quietly. I have never once changed an outcome. My vote has never mattered because every vote has been unanimous. Why did you think you could make a difference? Kira pressed gently. Because 300 years ago the Dominion was facing a crisis. Our primary world's ecosystem was collapsing. Agricultural output had dropped 40% in a century. I came to the council to request emergency intervention, to ask for help adapting our farming protocols to our planet's changing climate. What happened? I filed motion 4,123,774. It was approved 287 years later. By then we'd lost 3 billion Vraxians to famine. We'd solved the problem ourselves out of desperation. The council's help arrived just in time to be completely irrelevant. The admission hung in the air like a gravitational anomaly. Around him, Thexyler felt others listening. I'm sorry, Kira said, and her tone suggested she actually meant it. It was within the protocols, Thexyler said automatically. Then added, more quietly, but the protocols were worthless. They weren't always, Ambassador Lyrionel chimed from her position. Her species communicated through harmonic resonance, and her words carried layers of meaning. I've studied the histories. When the council first formed, it was genuinely revolutionary. 10,000 species, wildly different, all agreeing to talk instead of fight. The protocols were supposed to be guidelines, not gospel. What changed? Asked Torvin, his mechanical voice processing genuine curiosity. Entropy, suggested Gendar. All systems tend toward their lowest energy state. Active debate requires energy. Passive acceptance does not. Or maybe, Kira interjected, success became a trap. The protocols worked so well that you forgot why you needed them. Peace became an end unto itself rather than a foundation for growth. And you think you can do better? Wispella drifted closer, her gaseous form now a contemplative blue. Humanity hasn't even achieved internal planetary unity. Your species still fights itself over resources, ideology, territorial boundaries. You're right, Kira agreed easily. We're a mess. We've tried democracy, autocracy, theocracy, technocracy, and about a dozen other ocracies. We've had wars, revolutions, collapses, and renaissances. Our average governmental system lasts maybe 200 years before it needs major revision or complete replacement. And this is supposed to be encouraging? Morvex had joined the gathering, his official posture relaxed for the first time Thexyler could remember. It means we're used to failing and trying again, Kira said. We're not afraid of change because we've never stopped changing. Look, I'm not saying abandon the council. I'm saying remember that it's supposed to serve you, not the other way around. The protocols maintain order, insisted Wispella, but her colors showed uncertainty. Do they? Drexel rumbled. My people, the Titan Forges, are living constructs. We rebuild ourselves every century. Our population adapts, evolves, changes based on need. But the protocols treat us exactly as they did 10,000 years ago. We've submitted 4,000 motions requesting updated classification to reflect our current nature. All approved. None implemented. The bureaucratic machinery doesn't know what to do with us because we don't match the original database entry. The Crepuscular Collective has a similar problem, Felmoth added. We've evolved 6 new sensory organs in the last 5,000 years. The environmental standards for our worlds are based on our ancient physiology. Half our population lives in discomfort because the protocols can't be updated fast enough. Stories began to pour out. Grievances that had been filed and forgotten, problems that had been solved in spite of the council rather than because of it, species that had adapted and grown while the protocols remained frozen. Kira listened, her tablet recording everything, occasionally asking questions that dug deeper. How many of you, she finally asked, would say the council actually helps your people more than it hinders them? In a chamber of 10,000 delegates, representing a trillion beings across the galaxy, not a single voice, sensor, or signal indicated yes. The silence was deafening. So, Kira said softly, what are we going to do about it? The rebellion. The word spread through the council stations like a quantum wave function collapsing. The humans had broken everything and somehow no one wanted to fix it. Thexyler stood with Kira, Drexel, and a growing coalition of delegates in what had once been the High Chancellor's private meditation chamber. The irony wasn't lost on him. They were staging the first political movement in galactic history in a room designed for contemplating the perfection of order. The Conservative Caucus is mobilizing, Lyrionel reported, her harmonics carrying urgency. Morvex is calling for an emergency session to censure you, Ambassador Vance. Protocol 847 allows for the expulsion of members who threaten established stability. How many are with them? Kira asked calmly, studying the real-time coalition map on her tablet. 4,000 delegates, maybe more. They're scared. Good, Kira said, and everyone turned to stare at her. Fear means they're actually feeling something. That's progress. Progress toward being ejected from the council, Wispella pointed out. She'd fully joined their movement, her colors now cycling through determined shades of amber. They have the votes to expel you under the protocols. Then we need to move faster. Kira looked around the room at the 200 delegates who'd gathered. We have support from how many worlds? About 3,000 delegations are sympathetic, Thexyler reported. But sympathy and action are different things. Most are waiting to see which way the stellar winds blow. Classic collective action problem, Kira muttered. Everyone wants change but nobody wants to be first. Okay, new approach. Jundar, you said you've been analyzing the protocol's legal framework. The crystalline arbiter chimed affirmatively. For the past 72 hours, continuously. Ambassador Vance, I believe I've found something. Protocol 1, subsection 3, paragraph 47. He projected the text into the shared space. Any delegate may call for a grand assembly if they can demonstrate that established procedures are causing measurable harm to member populations. A grand assembly? Drexel leaned forward. I don't even know what that is. Because there hasn't been one in 9,847 years, Jundar said. It was part of the original council charter. In a grand assembly, all protocols can be suspended for debate. Any delegate can propose reforms. Everything is on the table. And what are the requirements to call one? Kira asked, though her smile suggested she already knew. Demonstrate measurable harm and obtain signatures from 2,000 delegates. The room went silent as the mathematics became clear. We have 3,000 sympathizers, Thexyler said slowly. We only need 2,000 signatures. They'll never let it happen, Felmoth warned. The Conservative caucus will challenge every signature, delay every procedural step. They can't, Gendar interrupted. Protocol 1, subsection 3 was designed specifically to prevent procedural blocking. Once 2,000 signatures are verified, the Grand Assembly must convene within 48 hours. No exceptions. It supersedes all other protocols. Kira stood, her small human frame somehow radiating determination. Then we have work to do. We need to document everything, every species suffering under outdated protocols, every delayed motion, every example of the system failing the beings it's meant to serve. We need testimony, data, evidence so overwhelming that even the Conservatives can't ignore it. I have 300 years of personal experience, Thexyler said. The Vraxian famine alone killed billions because we couldn't adapt fast enough. The Titan-forged dysphoria crisis, Drexel added. We've lost 30% of our population to existential collapse because the protocols won't recognize our evolved nature. The resonance choir's frequency displacement, Lyrionel chimed. Our young can't achieve harmonic maturation in environments calibrated for our ancestors' physiology. Stories poured forth. Each delegate held decades, sometimes centuries, of accumulated frustrations. Problems they'd been taught were just how things work. Suffering they'd been told was necessary for stability. Kira's tablet worked overtime, recording it all, organizing it into a devastating indictment of a system that had confused stability with stagnation. How long to gather 2,000 signatures? She asked. If we move quickly before Morvex can organize opposition? Maybe 24 hours, Thexyler estimated. Then we move quickly. Gendar, I need you to verify the legal framework, make sure there are no loopholes they can exploit. Drexel, organize the testimony collection. We need representatives from every major species group. Lyrionel, use your harmonic network to spread the word to delegates who can't access the standard communication channels. Wispella, you're our inside voice with the undecided, many of them trust you. Felmoth. I'll coordinate with the delegations from the outer spiral arms, he said before she could ask. They're always overlooked. They'll respond to someone actually paying attention to them. And me? Thexyler asked. Kira met his eyes. You're going to be the face of this. The Vraxian delegate who spent 300 years trying to work within the system before realizing the system was broken. People need to see that this isn't about destroying the council, it's about saving it. No pressure, Thexyler clicked, but he felt his thorax swelling with something he hadn't felt in centuries. Purpose. One more thing, Kira said as delegates began to disperse. When we call this Grand Assembly, we need to have solutions ready, not just complaints. We're not here to tear down 10,000 years of peace. We're here to build the next 10,000 years of growth. The revolution such as it was had begun. The Assembly. The Grand Assembly convened exactly 47 hours and 23 minutes after the petition was filed, 3 minutes ahead of the protocol deadline. Thexyler suspected Morvex had delayed as long as legally possible, hoping the movement would lose momentum. Instead, it had gained another 1,000 signatures. The Celestial Assembly Hall had been reconfigured for the first time in recorded history. The traditional podium arrangement was gone, replaced by a circular amphitheater design that Kira had pulled from humanity's ancient democratic experiments. Every delegate could see every other delegate. No one stood above anyone else. Morvex looked physically ill as he took his position, no longer at the elevated central dais, but in the circle with everyone else. This Grand Assembly is now in session, he said, his voice lacking its usual imperious tone. Ambassador Vance, you called this gathering. The floor is yours. Kira stood, but she didn't speak immediately. Instead, she activated a holographic display that filled the center of the circle. Numbers, graphs, data streams, 10,000 years of accumulated evidence. Thank you, High Chancellor, she began. I'm going to start with a question. What is the purpose of the Galactic Council? Silence greeted her. The question was so fundamental that no one had asked it in millennia. Protocol 1 says the purpose is to maintain harmony among member species, Gendar offered. And has it? Kira asked. She gestured to the display. This is a map of civil unrest across council space over the last 5,000 years. See these red zones? Regions where populations have rioted, protested, or simply abandoned council authority. There are 4,000 such zones. They represent 12% of council territory and growing. Local disturbances, Morvex said dismissively. Aberrations that you've ignored, Thexyler cut in, his voice steady. These aren't aberrations, High Chancellor. They're symptoms. When the Vraxian famine happened, we didn't riot. We died quietly, following the protocols while we starved. We were praised for our patience. But that patience cost 3 billion lives. He stood, his chitinous frame straightening with resolve. I've been complicit in this system for 300 years. I watched it fail my people and convinced myself that stability was worth the price. I was wrong. Around the circle, other delegates began to rise. The Crepuscular Collective has seen our population decline by 40% in 2,000 years, Felmoth said. Not from war or disease but from simple despair. Our young look at the council and see a future where nothing ever changes, where their voices will never matter. So they choose not to reproduce. We're dying of hopelessness. The Titan Forges lose 30,000 individuals per cycle to what we call entropic despair, Drexel rumbled. They simply stop rebuilding themselves. They let their consciousness dissipate. The council classifies it as natural life cycle variation. It's suicide. Testimony after testimony. Species after species. A litany of suffering hidden behind the facade of order. Lyrionel's harmonic voice carried grief so profound it brought resonant vibrations to the chamber walls. We sing the song of becoming when our young reach maturation. It's how we've passed down our culture for 100,000 years. But the frequencies required for the song don't match the environmental standards in Protocol 6847. Our children can't complete their becoming. They exist in permanent adolescence. We're losing our culture one generation at a time, and we've been too polite to complain. Kira let the testimonies continue for hours. The conservatives tried to interrupt, to cite protocols, to maintain order. But the dam had broken. Stories flooded forth, 10,000 years of small tragedies that had been systematically ignored because they didn't fit the proper filing procedures. Finally, as the testimony wound down, Kira spoke again. The council was created to prevent war, she said. And in that, it succeeded brilliantly. 10,000 years of peace is an extraordinary achievement. But somewhere along the way you confused preventing war with preventing all conflict. You made harmony itself the goal, rather than the foundation for something greater. She changed the display to show humanity's own chaotic history, wars, revolutions, renaissances, collapses. My species is violent, chaotic, contradictory. We fight constantly. But we also grow, adapt, create. We have this saying, necessity is the mother of invention. Our greatest achievements came from our greatest challenges. You've eliminated all challenges and with them eliminated growth. You would have us return to war? Morvex asked, but his voice held curiosity rather than accusation. I would have you return to life, Kira said. Disagreement isn't the same as violence. Debate isn't war. Change isn't chaos. You've built a beautiful machine that runs perfectly, but it doesn't go anywhere. She paused, meeting the eyes of delegates around the circle. I'm proposing we modify that machine. Not destroy it. Not abandon it. But give it a purpose beyond its own perpetuation. Make the council serve its people again, not the other way around. How? Wispella asked, her form now a contemplative violet. Kira smiled. I have some ideas. But more importantly, you have 10,000 species worth of ideas. Maybe it's time we actually listen to them. That would take forever, Morvex protested. Then let's start now. The new beginning. 3 months later, the Celestial Assembly Hall looked nothing like it had for 10,000 years. The circular arrangement had stayed, but now the chamber was divided into working groups, each focused on different aspects of council reform. Delegates moved freely between groups, their conversations filling the space with a cacophony that would have horrified the old guard but sounded like music to Thexyler's antennae. The rapid response protocol is ready for vote, Lyrionel harmonized, approaching with a data crystal. We've got support from 8,000 delegations. Thexyler accepted the crystal, marveling at how much had changed. The rapid response protocol would allow emergency motions to be fast-tracked, decided within days rather than decades. It included fail-safes to prevent abuse, but it prioritized living beings over procedural perfection. The Vraxian famine could have been addressed in weeks instead of centuries, he said quietly. Could have been, Lyrionel agreed. Can be for the next crisis. Across the chamber, Drexel was presenting the Cultural Autonomy Amendment, a framework that allowed species to opt out of protocols that conflicted with their fundamental nature, provided they could demonstrate no harm to others. The Titan Forges would finally be recognized for what they'd become rather than forced to fit ancient classifications. Kira stood at the center of it all, not directing but facilitating, asking questions that helped delegates find their own solutions. She'd refused any official leadership position, insisting that the council needed to learn to govern itself, not just follow a new authority figure. Ambassador Vance, Morvex approached, looking years older but somehow more alive than Thexyler had ever seen him. The former High Chancellor had resigned his position, choosing instead to lead the Historical Review Committee, a group dedicated to understanding how the council had lost its way. "I owe you an apology." "You really don't," Kira said. "I do. I spent 600 years enforcing a system I never questioned. I thought stability was the highest virtue. I was scared. Scared that if we changed anything we'd lose everything. And now..." Morvex gestured to the busy chamber. "Now I'm still scared. But I'm more scared of what we'd become if we didn't change. The Historical Committee has uncovered something troubling." "Want to hear?" "Always," Kira said. "The Calculation Committee, the one that died 6,000 years ago? They didn't die naturally. They voluntarily dissolved themselves." Thexyler's antennae shot up. "Why?" "They left a message buried in the deep archives. It said, 'We have created a perfect system for a static galaxy. But galaxies are not static. Life is not static. We fear we have built a monument to order that will become a tomb for growth. We dissolve this committee in the hope that future generations will have the courage to question what we have built. Forgive us if we have erred in creating something too perfect to evolve.'" The three of them stood in silence, absorbing the weight of that ancient message. "They knew," Kira said softly. "They knew what would happen and they couldn't stop it. Because no one questioned the protocols after they were gone," Morvex said. "We just kept following them, assuming that if they'd been good once, they'd be good forever. So we make sure this doesn't happen again," Thexyler said. "The Constitutional Review mandate, it requires every protocol to be reconsidered every 100 years. Not necessarily changed but questioned. And the sunset clauses," Kira added. "Any protocol that hasn't been actively reaffirmed in 500 years automatically expires. Forces periodic review." "The conservatives hate it," Morvex noted. "The conservatives are voting for it anyway," Lyrionel chimed. "Because they've seen the data. Even they can't deny that the old system was dying." A chime resonated through the chamber, the signal for a general vote. Delegates began moving toward their positions, but the atmosphere was different now. There was anticipation, engagement, actual curiosity about the outcome. "Today's agenda," Gendar announced, his crystalline voice carrying across the space. 16 proposed amendments to the constitutional framework, 7 emergency motions, and 43 debate topics for future consideration. All those in favor of the Rapid Response Protocol. Hands, appendages, energy fields and sensory organs rose across the chamber. Thexyler counted quickly, 9,200 in favor. Opposed? 723 votes against. Abstentions? 77 delegates choosing to sit this one out. Gendar's form flashed with satisfaction. The motion passes. First protocol to pass without unanimous consent in 10,000 years. Cheers erupted. Actual spontaneous cheers. Kira found Thexyler afterward as delegates celebrated their first true vote in millennia. "You're really not staying?" he asked. She'd announced her intention to return to Earth within the month, having declined the permanent ambassadorship. "Someone else from Earth will take my place," she said. "Someone who'll ask different questions, bring different perspectives. That's the point, no single voice should define the council. Not mine, not yours, not anyone's." "What will you tell your people about us?" Kira smiled. "That we met a galactic civilization that had achieved perfect peace and was slowly dying of it. And that they found the courage to choose messy, chaotic, beautiful life instead." She paused, looking around the transformed chamber. "Also, I'll tell them we should probably work on our internal problems before we get too smug. Your species managed 10,000 years of peace. We can barely manage 10 years. Thexyler's antennae twitched with amusement. "Perhaps that's humanity's gift to the galaxy. You're so used to fixing your own broken systems that you can't help but notice when others are broken too. Or maybe," Kira said, "we're just really good at asking uncomfortable questions." The galaxy needed someone to ask them. Around them, the celestial assembly hall hummed with conversation, debate, argument, and laughter. The protocols still existed, but they were tools now, not chains. The council still stood, but it walked forward instead of standing still. In the viewing gallery above, a new inscription had been placed, the words of the long-dead calculation committee, displayed as both warning and inspiration. Life is not static. Let those who follow us have the courage to question what we have built. Beneath it, in smaller text, a new edition in dozens of languages. Question asked. Answer found. Keep questioning. Thexsiler looked at the human who'd appended 10,000 years of order in just 10 minutes of questions. Thank you, he said simply. Kira grinned. Thank me by making sure the next person who questions everything gets listened to as quickly as I did. That, Thexsiler clicked, is a promise. The council had spent 10,000 years building perfect order. It would spend the next 10,000 learning to live. And that, somehow, felt like true progress.